bless you should share tonight.
All right, thanks, Bill, and thanks everybody for coming. And I've always really liked these Wednesday night services, even since I was a kid. And I'm going to have to say it's kind of an honor to be here for the first Wednesday night of 2023. So thanks everybody for coming. If anybody cares to turn to the book of Mark, I'm going to open with a couple of verses. Mark chapter 13, verses 28 and 29. And just thinking ahead a little bit, if anybody wants to earmark Luke chapter 2, I'm going to share some verses from there in just a little bit. So, Mark chapter 13, just two verses about the future, a forecast, if you would. Verse 28, "Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When her branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is near. So ye in like manner, when ye shall see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, even at the doors." The last time I was up here for opening scripture, I had talked about Christian living as being a lost art in some ways, because it just seems to me that people don't like practice it or teach it the way they used to. And it seems like there aren't very many, what we'd say, old school churches or old school Christians out there. And to me, that's kind of sad. And that's why I decided that for 2023, my new goal for Christian living for 2023 is back to the basics, back to the fundamentals, and keeping it old school when it's appropriate. Has everybody heard the church described as, or a church described as fundamental before? Yeah. I think everybody probably has a different definition of that, but when I think of a church as being fundamental, my definition, and you can quote me if you want, I would say if a church is fundamental, that means sticking to basic biblical standards for conduct and living without exception and without deviation. So it is a good thing to be fundamental, and I want to suggest that it would be a good thing for the church to be old school in 2023. And, I can't help but think about how the world's changed. And I turned 40 years old last year. So, I'm starting to feel like I've seen a few things evolve in my lifetime, And it seems like the world's changed and how the standards have changed and the definition of what's, normal, what's acceptable, and what's okay has all changed. And, I can't help but say it seems like we were better off 20 or 30 years ago. And, I'm a little worried that the church has been changed too. I'm a little worried that as the world has changed, the church has gone off in its own experimental direction and maybe gone off the reservation a little bit. And I don't mean this local church, but the church across the board. But that's why I want to make it my goal for Christian living for 2023 to just simply get back to the basics. Most people that know me are aware that over the past couple years, I've had an opportunity to take a few martial arts classes at a local facility. And we're really fortunate to have some really good, really talented instructors at our facility. And one class, one of our head instructors, we had a conversation, and he said something I'll never forget. He said that, in martial arts, there's this stereotype out there that if someone's a black belt, everybody automatically thinks that they're like the epitome of skill, or they can do this or they can do that. Then he said, to me, a black belt is not someone that can do 100 million things. A black belt is someone who should be able to do the basic stuff really well enough to teach it. And that makes sense. As a matter of fact, Bruce Lee, has a lot of famous quotes out there, but one quote he has, he said, "Don't be afraid of a guy who's practiced 10,000 kicks one time. Be afraid of a guy who's practiced one kick 10,000 times." But whenever my instructor said that a black belt should be able to do the basic stuff really well, it got me thinking, that's kind of how the church is. We should be able to do the basic stuff really well. Even though the country has went off in so many different directions and taken the church with it, it has me thinking, are we still able to do the basic stuff really well? I think some of the most prominent, popular Christians in this country, they're who are they? They're TV personalities. They're preachers of mega churches. Is that right? Like for example, Joel Osteen. He preaches at a mega church, right? I'm pretty sure he had his own board game out at one point. Hey, that's cool and everything, but those guys that are preaching at the mega churches and have their own, podcasts and their own board games, can they still do the basic stuff really well? Um, and how about the Christians that have taken the gospel and gone off in their own experimental direction with it? Can they still do the basic stuff really well? I kind of doubt it. But I'd like to challenge us as a local Bible believing, Bible practicing church here. Um, I notice most of us in this room are adults that have been in this church for a long time. And it looks like most of us have like started here at one point and like evolved and taken on leadership roles and different responsibilities and roles in the church, and that's good. But I want to challenge us. Let's make sure we can still do the basic stuff really well in 2023. If someone asks you your favorite hymn, could you tell them? How about if someone asks you what's your favorite verse? Do you have a favorite verse or a favorite scripture? Do we know why we baptize people? Do we know why we take communion? Are we pro-life? Are we ready to stand our ground if we're under pressure? So I've got, for tonight's devotional, I want to look at three different areas of our lives and some verses that can help us focus on doing the basic stuff really, really well in 2023 and being old school for Christ whenever it's appropriate. So I've got three areas of life that we're going to look at: life at school, life at home, and life out in the real world. So if anybody has Luke chapter 2 handy, we're going to look at some verses there in just a little bit. So the first section I've got put together is the way we conduct ourselves in school and how to live the Christian life really well and basically. And most of us in the room are adults, and you might think that, well, this isn't going to apply to us. Well, it will, because most of us have kids that are in school, right? Or if not grandkids that are in school, or if not going to be in school someday. So it'll apply to us, because we're going to, like I said, we're going to raise kids that are in school. And I mentioned earlier the way the world's changed since I've been a kid. It seems like when I was a kid back in the 80s and 90s, there was kind of a common goal that we all had. We all wanted to finish school. We wanted to succeed. We wanted to stay out of trouble, go places, do things, accomplish things. No regrets, no remorse, no second chances, no turning back, no excuses. That was our common goal. But it seems like today, kids don't care if they fail or succeed. They don't care if they fall in with the wrong crowd. They don't care if they get into legal trouble or if they end up living off the entitlement system. And there's one thing that happened when I was in junior high I'll never forget. We were in gym class, and a handful of us had got a little unruly and insubordinate, and I was probably one of the ones that was at fault. I'll just have to confess that right now. But our teacher gave us a lecture, and he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Do you want to be the class clown?" I'll tell you who the class clown is. The class clown's the guy living on the streets or the guy in jail for killing somebody. That's who your class clown is. So how do we avoid the trap? Or in this case, how do we help our kids avoid the trap or our grandkids avoid the trap? Back to the basics. One verse, I don't think we have to turn there. I think we all know it. Proverbs 13:20. He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. And it's simple. Whether you're like in school or out in the real world, surround yourself with smart people, talented people. Don't fall in with a group of troublemakers or simpletons. I know that there's a verse in the Bible that says comfort the feeble-minded, but that's not what we're talking about. So surround yourself with smart people and talented people that are going to lift you up, not bring you down. That's the most basic way to avoid the trap. Now, with that, I'd like us to look at Luke chapter 2, verses 42 to 49. In this story, Jesus Christ is 12 years old. And let's go ahead and follow along with me, if you will, Luke 42 to 49. We'll look at this episode that happened in Jesus' life and see what happened and see what he did. Verse 42, when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days, they found him in the temple, 12 years old, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. Verse 48, and when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. She says, we've been looking everywhere for you. Where were you? Verse 49, he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? Why are you so worried about me? I'm taking care of the Lord's business. Jesus is 12 years old, hanging out with smart people, talented people, getting independent from mom and dad, going places, doing things in the name of the Lord. I must be about my Father's business. That's what we need to encourage our youth to do today. And, you might say maybe somebody is in a bad situation. Maybe they come from a bad home. They're at a disadvantage. Maybe you don't think they'll ever make it to college. That's no excuse. If you care to, turn with me to the book of Daniel chapter 1. I've got one verse, Daniel 1:17. I'll read it, so if you don't have time to turn there, that's all right. So the first chapter of the book of Daniel, Daniel and his 3 friends. I think we all know the history here. His kingdom gets taken over by another kingdom. Daniel and his friends are basically abducted, drug into the enemy's camp, forced into the enemy's school and into the enemy's culture. They're at a disadvantage. Verse 17, as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had an understanding in all visions and dreams. There really is no excuse. Secondly, moving on then, I talked about the 3 areas of life I had to look at. Secondly, is our conduct at home. How do we run our home, and how do we run our Christian life at home when we're not out in public and we're not at church where everybody can see us? I did a little bit of research in preparation for tonight's devotional, and I read a couple sad statistics. I read that about 50% of marriages end in divorce today. And what's the number one cause? Infidelity, unfaithfulness. But that's not all. I read about why the youth are leaving the church today. And what I had read was some data that was collected pretty recently. About 34% of the youth that leave the church, it's because they move away, or they go to college, or they go to work. But another 32%, they leave the church because they view church members or leaders as hypocritical. They see the church leaders living one way at church and a totally different way at home. Or they see mom and dad living one way at church and a totally different way at home, living a double life, if you will. Matthew 15:8, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far, far from me. Turn with me, if you would, to the book of Psalm 101, the first couple of verses, Psalm chapter 101. So the question comes up again, how do we avoid the trap? It's simple, back to the basics. Like I said earlier, be faithful to your family, your spouse and your kids. Be mindful your kids are watching, but be mindful God's watching at home all the time. And back to the basics. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he won't depart from it. A man will leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and they'll be one flesh. Psalm 101, verses 1 to 3. I will sing of mercy and judgment. Unto thee, O Lord, will I sing. I will behave myself wisely in a perfect way. O when wilt thou come unto me? I will walk within my house with a perfect heart. I will set no wicked thing before my eyes. I hate the work of them that turn aside. It shall not cleave to me. Psalm 101 is a challenge for us to live the same way at home that we do at church. So that's how we avoid the trap. Back to the basics. That's all there is to it. I got one more section then. I talked about so far trying to live out our Christian life in a basic manner in school, at home, and now out in the real world is my last section. It seems like there's a certain level of security and safety in Christian living in school and at home, but the real world is pretty unwelcoming and pretty unforgiving, and a lot of the times it's just plain hard to be a Christian out there. And I've been using the word back to the basics a lot tonight, and I've been using the phrase how to avoid the trap a lot. And, there's no way I can cover real world Christian living all in one night. But I think that the most important thing that we can do to live out our faith out in the real world is to simply trust God. I've been told this many, many times, and this is a really hard lesson to learn. I think I'm learning it. I don't know if I have it mastered yet, but I'll share something that I think we've all heard at one time or another. If you can't control it, don't worry about it. I think that is sound. I think that is biblical. Research what the Bible has to say about worry, or look up what Jesus has to say about worry. If it's out of your control, don't worry about it. You can trust it to God. You can act on it, but don't lose any sleep over it. I have been living through this COVID-19 pandemic basically every minute ever since it's been created. You know what I mean? I've had to see patients in record numbers. I've had to put up with schools being locked down, churches being locked down. Had to get a barely authorized vaccine. And right when we thought it was over, we got hit by another wave that was worse than the first one. And I'm not even sure if it's over yet, to tell you the truth. I don't know what 2023 is going to bring. But you know what's still true after all that? If you can't control it, don't worry about it. You can't help it if you can't control it. Who remembers 9/11, 2001? Yeah, I was kind of a young kid back then. I was 18 or 19, but I remember whenever the attack first happened, and I was going to college at Shippensburg, and I would go home every weekend, and there was a lot of fear, a lot of rumors. Most people my age were afraid we were going to get drafted. There were rumors that there were going to be economic and financial crises, and there were rumors that our money wasn't going to be worth anything. And I remember this one weekend in particular, me and my dad and some of his friends were farming, which was something I really liked doing on weekends whenever I got home, just hanging out on the farm with the guys. And we had a conversation about it, and of course all the rumors and the fear factor stuff came up. And Dad said, if it comes up your driveway, worry about it, and if it doesn't, don't. Many, many years later, I was working at a clinic, and I was working with this doctor that was visiting. He was kind of a cool city guy, I think from Philadelphia or something. He just had a cool persona about him, and we talked about, how the world's changed from whenever we were younger to now. And I had told the story about how 9/11 happened, and what I was taught was, if it comes up your driveway, worry about it. And he said, old school pop, I like that. I'll never forget that. But, can we agree so far that old school would be maybe a compliment or a good thing if it comes to how you live out your Christian life? Sticking to the basics and sticking to the fundamentals. I got a couple more verses here. If everybody wants to, why don't we turn to the book of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 26. I'll give you a minute to turn there. Proverbs 26, verse 13. I had mentioned earlier how I've noticed the changes in the world ever since I've been a kid until now, and the problems that our young people face and the conduct habits that they have. I've kind of noticed that it seems like the more I hear and the more I watch the news and hear things, it seems like today's a younger generation suffers from sort of a lack of motivation, if you will, among other things. Proverbs 26:13. The slothful man saith, there's a lion in the way, a lion is in the streets. So, exactly 4 chapters back is the answer. Proverbs 22:13. Exactly 4 chapters back. 22:13. The slothful man saith, there is a lion without. I shall be slain in the streets. Can't go outside. Can't go to school. Can't go to work. Can't do anything. It's too dangerous. Can you help it if there's a lion in the streets? Can you help what you do about it? Here in central Pennsylvania, is there a lion in the streets today? 1 Peter 5:8, your adversary the devil walks about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Can we help that? Can we help what we do about it? Ephesians 6:11, turn there if you want to. I'm going to read one verse out of the passage. Ephesians 6, verse 11. It's the passage about the armor of God. Ephesians 6:11. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. If you go through and read those like 7 or 8 verses that talk about the armor of God, it talks about the helmet, the breastplate, every piece of armor you can pretty much picture on somebody. But don't forget there's a weapon mentioned also, the sword of the Spirit. So when we're fighting against the devil, sometimes you got to go on offense or get a little bit old school, if you know what I mean. In conclusion tonight, let's look at John chapter 20, verse 29, the final verse. It's where after Jesus is resurrected, Thomas doesn't believe that he's risen or that he's who he says he is. So John 20:29, Jesus proves himself to Thomas. Then Thomas finally believes Jesus is who he says he is. John 20:29, Jesus says unto him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed. I have a hypothetical question. No one has to answer out loud, but what is the ultimate act of Christian maturity? We can think about that for a minute, but if someone asked us that, what would we say? What is the ultimate act of Christian maturity? I want to suggest that Jesus said, blessed are they that have not seen me and yet believed anyway. I want to suggest that basically trusting God is the most basic action we can take as a Christian. You can do it no matter where you are. You can trust God if you're on vacation. You can trust God if you're at work. You can trust God if you're laying in a hospital bed. Trusting God is the most basic action we can take as a Christian, but I want to suggest that trusting God is also the act of ultimate Christian maturity. Because it takes a lot more maturity and a lot more faith to trust God than it does to trust yourself, if you ask me. That's pretty much all the devotional I have. We'll go to prayer here in a little bit. I have requested that I close my sermon with or message with 1 or 2 verses from a hymn. I'd like us to go ahead and sing the first and the last verse of 144. Only trust Him. Number 144, first and last verse. Like I said before, I don't know what 2023 is going to bring. I don't think anybody really does. But I like to encourage us as a local church that as we try to live out our Christian life, whether it's at home or at school or out in the real world, I'd like us to just to focus on trying to get back to the basics and the fundamentals. And if you have to, be a little bit old school because there's nothing wrong with that.